Welcome back to another episode of Smalls That Sell, and you guys have came in right in the middle of a family challenge build-off between me and two of my kids, and we take this stuff seriously. It's like the Hatfields and the McCoys around here, except I have to sleep under the same roof as these crumb snatchers here lately. Been having to sleep with one eye open. It's that serious. And how this challenge came to be came from one of our very first episodes of Smalls That Sell with the highest profit margins of almost anything that I've ever built. This squirrel table. If you remember, this was designed by my kids, and they went into mass production mode and sold a ton of these things. At the same time that they were building these squirrel feeders, I was building super nice farmhouse tables, and the profit margins from these simple squirrel feeders blew my tables out of the water. And then in another episode, I covered the chicknick table, again designed by one of my kids. Two great low-cost, high-profit builds, but the problem is I did not break it down and teach you guys how to make it like I normally do. And ever since that video posted, I've had a ton of requests for me to teach you all how to make that. So since that was originally designed by my kids, I challenged them to a squirrel feeder build-off. So we each came up with our own squirrel feeder designs, and this is what I'm up against. The only rules for this challenge is that you could only use one picket and you had to be creative. So we have our new and improved version of the squirrel picnic table. The super cool thing about his design for this is that you can actually get two of these out of one fence picket. So if you're building this out of a pine picket, you can knock it out for right around $1. Or if you decide to use cedar, it's still only $1.89 in material. These things are going to sell like crazy. And then we have the one picket squirrel porch swing. Another great idea, great design. Super proud of these guys, and they did exactly like I do. They prototype the heck out of something until they get it just perfect. And then we have my design. So I'm running a little bit behind on mine. I will not be covering that in this video, but it's going to be super awesome, and it's going to blow both of these designs out of the water. Maybe. So I'll be covering my design in the next episode, but for this episode, I'm going to be teaching you how to make each one of these squirrel feeders. So let's go ahead and dive into the making of the picnic table. So as always in this video, I will teach you step by step and give you the dimensions to every part. But if you are a plans in the hand type of person, I'll throw a link in the description and the comments below to my Etsy shop. And for those that have never seen any of my plans, they are extremely detailed and simple to follow. Shameless plug. And just like I did with the chicknick table for one of my other kids, any and all sales from either one of these plans will be going to the kid that designed it. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and hop into this build. What I love about this picnic table design is that it's super easy to do and it does not use much material. To start out on this one, that's all that I've done is taken my fence picket, cut a 1 1/4 inch board off at full length, and two 1-inch boards. Since there are a lot fewer parts on this one, let's go ahead and cut all the parts at once. We're going to cut our legs, and for this we'll be using the 1 1/4 inch material. We will be needing 4 parts that are 8 inches long from tip to tip. Both of the ends will be cut at 45 degrees. So I'll make my first 45-degree cut, and then I'll measure down 8 inches. Then I'll just use a square or a flat piece of wood to strike my line. Then I'll just slide the board down and make my cut. And then once you have your first one cut, you can use this as a template for the rest of your legs. Now that we have our 4 legs cut, let's go ahead and make our seat braces. And for this, we'll be using the same 1 1/4 inch material that is 13 inches long. I'm just going to add a little bit of decoration to the edges of this and knock off these sharp corners. So to do that, I'm going to measure up a 1/2 inch on the ends of each board, set my saw to 45 degrees, and then make those cuts. So now let's go ahead and cut all the parts for our picnic table slats. And for this, we're going to be using our 1-inch material. And each one of these slats are going to be 10 inches long. We'll be needing 9 of these. And the last 2 parts that we'll be needing to cut will be our tabletop supports. These are going to be 1 inch by 5.5 inches long. Once we get these 2 parts cut, just like we did for the seat brace, I'm going to measure up a 1/2 inch on each end, set my saw to 45 degrees, and make those cuts. So now with all of our parts cut, let's go ahead and attach our brace boards to our legs. I'll be using a piece of scrap board on the bottom just to help keep the legs square, and we want the tips of the legs to be touching. So next, let's go ahead and add our 13-inch seat bracket. This needs to be 1 1/8 inch from the bottom. I'm just going to throw some marks on there so I know where to add my wood glue. And then from right to left, we're going to be needing 2 3/8 overhang measuring from the top. Now let's install our tabletop bracket. It will sit flush with the top. We will have 1 inch of overhang on each side. Throw a couple brad nails in just to keep it in place. And the reason why we're going to be using screws on this is because it's a pretty big build and we're going to have quite a bit of weight hanging from one end. So we'll flip our board over, and then I'll measure up 1 3/4 inch from the bottom of each leg. Once we have our 2 marks, we can go ahead and take a straight edge and mark our center. Now with that marked, I'm going to measure in 3/8 from each side. And for our top screws, I'm going to measure a 1/2 inch down, and again 3/8 from each side. I know I've said it several times throughout the video, but these measurements would be perfect for making a template or a jig. So with our screw placement marked, I'm just going to pre-drill and install my screws. And for this, I'm just going to be using some 1-inch exterior screws. So this is what the leg assembly should look like. So now let's go ahead and build another one just like this. Now that we have our 2 leg assemblies assembled, let's go ahead and add our benches in our top. So just to help to hold these 2 pieces together, I'm just going to take one of my tabletop boards. I'm not actually going to measure and put this into place, but I'm going to clamp it on both sides. And again, this is not where it's going to go. I'm just doing this so I can make my adjustments without my parts falling over. So I know that I'm going to be wanting a 1/2 inch of overhang on each side of this table. So let's go ahead and pre-drill and mark out each one of our slats. We're going to install our screws at 3/4 inch in the center of the board. And then once you have your first one pre-drilled, you can actually use this as a jig to pre-drill the rest. So with our slats pre-drilled, let's go ahead and install our 2 outer seat boards. These boards will sit flush against the edge of the brace. Like I mentioned, we'll leave a 1/2 inch of overhang. Okay, so with our 2 outside seats in place, we can go ahead and undo our clamps. Let's get those out of the way. And now we're ready to install the rest of our boards. So I'm going to go ahead and start by finishing out my seats. For my spacing, I'm going to leave about 1/8 inch gap. To make this a little quicker, I'm just going to use a couple of washers. Now that we have the 2 seats installed, let's go ahead and put the top on. I'm going to start by installing the top on the 2 outside edges, and then I'll install my center boards with equal spacing. And there we have it. Super cool, super easy to build. The only thing that we would have left to do if you wanted was put a screw in the very center for a corn cob. And then we would also need to put 2 screws on the inside to attach this to the side of a tree, or however that you would like to attach it. Some people do not even want these on trees, they just like setting them out on another table. So you may pre-drill those if you're selling these, but I wouldn't actually put the screws in unless the customer wanted them. As you see, that was a super easy and profitable build, and now it is time for the porch swing. And if you guys have any suggestions on how to improve either one of these builds, drop them into the comments. And coming up with different ideas for an existing build is something that we've been working on in our Patreon community. I'll post a picture of something random and just ask, what do you see? What would you do with this? It's crazy how people see things in different ways and come up with ideas to improve on a build. So if a community like that sounds interesting to you, I'll throw a link in the description. And I'm super pumped to announce that this channel now has its own Discord group. We have huge plans for this with group chats, live streams, and it's looking like that this will be the new home for our brag boards. So if you have any brags that you would like to submit, make sure that you check out the link that I'm going to put in the description for the Discord server and submit that brag. I'm a little worried about this one. It's super cool, made out of 1 fence picket. So you can essentially make this for $2. And it is the porch swing Squirrel Feeder. And again, like any of these other smalls, things like these sell like crazy, and if you are going to go into mass production mode, then I would make sure to set up jigs. It's going to be for the spacing, laying out parts, you know, things like that. I may not do that for all of these because I'm not going into mass production mode, but if you are, use jigs. So a little disclaimer for this one, do not try to sit on the little mini swing. It will not feel good. So that screw is actually for a corn cob. A lot of times on these Squirrel Feeder builds, you will see something like this. If you did not want to put a corn cob on here, you could set a container on this thing, or actually turn this last slat up and use this as a feed bin, whatever you like. I like the way that this looks because it looks like a porch swing. Let me show you how he built it. So for all of these builds, we're going to be using fence pickets that are 5.5 inches wide by 72 inches long. And we chose to use cedar for our builds because it cleans up nice and it's only a couple of bucks more. For the first part of this build, we're going to be using our 1.5 inch material, and we're going to be needing 2 boards that are 10 inches long and 2 boards that are 5.5 inches long. So there's a lot of smaller parts for these builds. So anytime that there's a smaller part that needs an angle, like this one, cut it out of a longer strip. So I would cut all of my small parts that had any angle first. Let me show you what I mean. So I've set my saw to 20 degrees, and this board is a longer board. I'm only needing 5.5 inches. I'm going to make my 20-degree cut first, and then I'll measure 5.5 inches from the tip and make my flush cut. So this was cut at 0, this is cut at 20 degrees. I need 2 of those. Alright, so for all of these builds, with the exception of the table, I'll be using exterior wood glue and brad nails for most of the assembly. Let's get started on this base. Okay, so to start out on the bottom, we have our 2 10-inch boards, and then we have our 2 5.5 inch boards with our 20-degree angles. Let's go ahead and connect our 20-degree sides to one of our 10-inch boards. And once you have both of those attached, just flip it over and we'll go ahead and attach the back 10-inch board. This would be a good time just to remind you guys that if you're planning on painting or staining any of this, it'd be a good idea to do that before you assemble it. Okay, so once we have our base done, let's go ahead and attach the seat boards. We'll be needing 6 of these that are 10 inches long by 1 inch wide. And if you want the sharp corners of these to be knocked off, let's go ahead and do that before we nail this down. Okay, so now it's time to attach our seat boards. I'm going to start with this back angle, and we are going to place it even with the back board. All of these will be 1 inch in. And now I'm going to install the front board. I'm going to leave a 1 inch overhang on the outside and about a 1/4 inch overhang on the front. And now to install the rest of these, we're just going to be using equal spacing with 1 inch each side. All right, so this is where we're at. Now let's put the backboards on here. We're going to start with our 2 pieces that are 1 inch by 10 inches. For this, I'm going to be using a little bit of a longer nail. These are 1.5 inches. Then once we have the 2 vertical back supports on, then we'll add the 2 horizontal back supports. Both of these are 1.5 inches by 9 inches long. And for these, the top of the bottom board will be installed at 3 inches, and the top of the top board will be installed 1/2 inch down. All right, and this is where we're at. Now we just need to add the seat backing and our arms. Okay, so for our seat back, we're going to be needing 8 pieces that are 1 inch wide by 6 inches long. And if you want to decorate this up like he did in his, you want to add a little bit of an arch to this. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this. You can either use a jigsaw to knock those edges off, or you can do the whole thing with the sander. So pretty easy to get that look. And it actually goes a lot quicker if you have a belt sander. So once we have all of our backing rounded over, let's go ahead and get those installed. I'm going to start by installing the 2 outside boards. And for the spacing of these backboards, I'm going to be using right at around a 1/4 inch. So we'll be needing 2 of these vertical arm supports. They're 1.5 inches wide by 1.5 inches tall, cut at 90 degrees on one side, and then 3 degrees on the opposite side. This is what I was talking about earlier about cutting angles on longer boards and then making your 90-degree cut. And then for the top part of the arm support, we'll just be needing a 1 inch by 6 inch board. And then to put these together, we want to measure in 1 inch. And at that point, we want the longest tip of this small board to be at that mark. I'll be using 1.5 inch brad nails for this as well. Now with our arm supports made, let's go ahead and attach them to the swing. The vertical arm support should be sitting flush, and then we're going to measure 2.5 inches in from the edge of the front. Then we will attach it to our backing and our bottom. Now for the actual arm rests. The arm rests are 7 inches long by 1 inch wide, and again we need to round the outside edges over. So let's do that. So to install these, it's going to line up on the inside and go past the outside edge. We're going to leave a 1/2 inch overhang over the arm support. Only thing that we have left to do is to touch up some of these other edges with the sander and then add our eye hooks and chains. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mark the top of my arms for the eye hooks, and I'm going to mark at 1.5 inches and 5.5 inches. I'm going to pre-drill these holes, and they're only going to be 1/4 inch in from the edge. That way the eye hook not only goes through the armrest, but into the armrest support. Quick tip on installing eye hooks or J hooks of any kind, you can actually chuck one up into your drill and install it that way. Install your chain. This is actually a super handy chain for about any type of application. It's called a number 16 jack chain. And we're going to start out on each side putting 10 links connecting the 2 eye hooks. So as far as where to actually connect this, I would actually find the balance point, and at that point I would connect the chain that's going to be attached to whatever you want it to be attached to. And there we have it. Not too bad, but is it good enough to win this competition? Don't forget who brings you awesome content every week. But honestly, this is a great concept. It's actually a lot bigger than what it looks, and people will love it. Again, anything that has to do with outdoors, anything that has to do with feeding birds, feeding chickens, obviously, feeding squirrels, people will buy it. There's only one thing left to do, and that is to put a screw through the center of this board. I'm going to leave that out for now because I may put a little tray or something like that in mine. The only change that I would make personally would be on this arm support. I would actually put a couple of little 1 inch screws into the bottom, and the same thing for this little corner here. I'd put a screw there just because there's a lot of weight being pulled up. Other than that, he did a great job on this design, and I'm a little worried. So I hope that you've enjoyed that video. 2 awesome high profit builds that anyone can do. So until next time, guys, pick a project, gather your supplies, and make it happen. No excuses, and I'll catch you on the flip side.